besides a strong finish in the last 300 meters where they approached their target, the execution of the piece was not what we were necessarily looking for. And the question is why? And I think the big thing that happens with athletes, to your point, is, we underestimate the power that the mind plays in almost measuring. I think in many ways, what I always remind myself, or what I constantly revisit, is if 2,000 meters, just use it as an example. We've both rode 2,000 meters hundreds of times. Every athlete who has trained has rode 2,000 meters, dozens, if not hundreds of times. But the moment you slap the label of 2K onto, and again, we're using this as our example, but it could be, you can translate to anything, erg test or marathon, whatever. But the moment you slap the label of 2K onto that test rather than 2,000 meter piece, the expectation starts to creep in. All of a sudden, that 2,000 meter piece that we could train and probably get close to PRing just by treating it like a normal training piece, now we treat it like a test. And all of a sudden, race plans come into play. We have, goal targets come into play, right? Now the goal split, comparison comes into play, whether that's, outside comparison because you're trying to produce a score to send off to someone like you for college recruiting, or internal comparison because I want to beat some of the athletes on my team and I need to produce this score for 2,000 meters. And all of a sudden, all this expectation, the moment we go about that piece and it doesn't go the way that we were expecting, we start to unravel. And that's where you can sense it very early in a piece, like I highlighted with the athletes. 600 meters in, something that I know 100% of the time, or 99.9% of the time, for 1,000 meters, they can hold that split. 600 meters in, they start to fall off because they're thinking, all that expectation has now creeped into their mind and it starts to unravel them. So talk about that a little bit, right? Using, whether it's 2,000 meter testing, 5K testing. I know you guys do 30-minute testing, right? Because you see it in all these different things, but the layer of expectation that comes in. I think the last thing that before I stop is, I think one of the things that makes this so fun for both of us is we walk that talk every morning or every afternoon. Not to say we're, training for anything of note or whatever. I know you do marathons. I just train because I love to train. And the level of training is significantly different than probably what we were doing back in college, but we still train every single day in some aerobic endurance-based capacity. And you know how it feels when you're doing a 13-mile training run when the doubt starts creeping in at mile 3. And now you have a decision to make. Do I push through, or, which we both have had happen before, we succumb to the mental chatter and we walk our way home, the walk of shame home after not finishing a workout. So take that wherever you want, but talk about that side of things, right? That mental, dealing with the expectation and all those different things.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point with I know 99% of the time this athlete could hold this number for 1,000 meters. And so it's like, okay, why then do we back off so quickly? And I actually heard something a few weeks back. I heard it and I was like, oh my God, this is so good. It was, you never quit because of the present pain that you're experiencing. You quit because of the perceived pain that you're going to be in X number of minutes or miles or whatever it is down the road. And that's so true, right? Because that athlete can make it to 1,000 meters, but they're thinking at 600 in about what they're going to feel like in 1,000 meters. And it's like, you can't think about what you're going to feel like in the last, 500, 600 meters of the piece. You got to be in, the first 600. You got to be in the stroke that you're in right now, because you don't know what's going to happen between now and then. But as soon as you start to project that, okay, I already feel like I'm in a hole and this isn't going to get any better. I better roll it back now and just be safe. Right? Like, you don't know what could have happened. Let's say you made it to 1,000 meters holding that split, does your mindset then shift to, wow, I just made it 1,000 meters. I'm halfway through this thing. Like, I'm on my goal number. I've got this. But you didn't even give yourself the shot to feel that way because you rolled it back quickly, early, right? And like, you see that all the time, I think, especially in young athletes and even at the collegiate level, athletes who back it off right there around that, like 600-700 meters in, back it off for about 600-700 meters. And then all of a sudden they're like 5 split seconds under their goal for their final 500. And, and they come back and they're like, man, like, I have a really good sprint. I just have a really good sprint. And you're like, yeah, but where was that 5 split seconds could have been sprinkled in through this middle portion of the piece? You were a little bit afraid to go there, though, you know? And I tell athletes this all the time. I talk about it often. It's one of my favorite, like, things to die on is, if you're in a race, right, put yourself out on the water. Because I think it's easy to get too sucked into yourself and your own world when you're on the erg and your erg piece. But all of this stuff, these habits translate into what happens in the boat out on the water to some degree. Whether you want to own that or not, it absolutely happens on the water. If you're someone who backs it off 600 in on the erg, you're doing it on the water, like, to some degree. Put yourself out there. If you are in a bow ball to bow ball battle, let's say it's the NCAA championship, final 500 meters, and you're in the race, you're going to find a sprint at 500 to go, right? You're not just going to fold over and say, man, I went too hard in the middle of the piece, and I guess I'm just going to hand it over to, my competition in the lane next to me. You're going to figure it out. You're going to find a way. And maybe you win, maybe you don't, but you're going to find a way to try. So the problem is when you back it off early, the person who didn't back it off, they're going to get you in the middle of that race, and they're going to put you away to the point where you're going to think you can't. The sprint won't matter at that point. So we don't see the consequence of that on the erg because, it's just us. It's a machine. It's a number. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything, right? Like, it's just a number. But when you put it out on the water, you have these different scenarios that happen. And we've tried to work really hard on this with our team, in terms of, like, you have to be able to put yourself into a hole a little bit earlier and trust your fitness. So, like, kind of like this athlete that you're talking about sounds like had more fitness, like, you believe that they have more fitness than they probably believed that they had. And if you trust that the fitness is there, you're going to be able to hang on while you're in that hole. The thing that you need to hang on in the hole, though, is this. Like, you have to trust yourself and, like, be like, okay, this really sucks, but can I make it 10 more strokes? All right, I made it 10 more. Can I make it 10 more? Like, however, you got to break it up for yourself. But if you don't get in there deep enough, you're never going to find out. I feel like I could go on with this forever. So tell me where else we want to go with this.
Yeah, no, I think, like, number one, I think, like, you're absolutely right. And, it's how do you unlock that little piece in the mind that is kind of being dormant for the first, 1700, right? Like, you're going to be able to unlock that little piece at the end of the last 300 to help finish the piece, right? It's kind of like I said, like, when you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you usually find that sprint and then you say you're just a good sprinter, right? But in reality, you were kind of shielding yourself from the, staying in the fight for the first 1,700 meters, or really not the first 1,700, but really probably 1,000 meters or 1,250 after, the opening 500 or whatever it may be. You were pushing away, right? You're letting the doubt and, the fear prevent you from staying locked in, staying in the fight, staying composed while also going fast, and then still having that little bout of extra motivation to close it out in the last 250, in the last 300. That's how you really will score that, that 2K, that breakout 2K that you've never expected, that breakout race performance. You're towing that line so fine in the 1,000 because you've been there, you've exposed yourself to it. In that middle 1,000, you've been there, you've exposed yourself to it, rather than going up in pace, right? Let's just use 2-minute splits to be easy. Rather than going up to 2:02, 2:03 to safeguard yourself, can you stay at that 2 minutes, that 2:01, and still that sprint is going to be there 9 times out of 10. There's going to be that one or two times where it doesn't happen, where you don't have it, you just don't have that kick. And usually that's because of something in that first 1,700. But most of the time, you're going to be able to hold steady in that first 1,700, toe the line, toe that red line, and still drop it and take it home. That's how you achieve that breakthrough.